The galaxy forgot Earth. They thought we were weak, helpless, broken. Until the oceans boiled. Until the ancient dreadnoughts rose from the abyss. And the sky itself trembled before humanity's silent fire. Stay until the end, because the secret Earth has hidden for centuries is something the galaxy was never meant to see. Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, where humanity's greatest battles and hidden legends come alive. Before we dive deeper into this epic confrontation, let's hear from you. Do you believe humanity's true power lies in our technology or in our spirit? If Earth was attacked today, would you fight or flee? Smash that like button if you believe humanity never truly gives up. Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the next untold story of survival and defiance. Secret code for true warriors. Comment #SilentFire to show the galaxy that Earth's true strength is still alive. For centuries, Earth was forgotten. In the endless tapestry of the galaxy, woven with empires that spanned thousands of worlds, Earth was a faded thread, barely noticed, barely remembered. A small blue world tucked away in a spiral arm, orbiting an unremarkable star. To the great civilizations who ruled the stars, we were a footnote, a primitive curiosity whose destiny had long since been written: stagnation, collapse, extinction. Primitive. Fragile. Insignificant. Commander Sarn of the Varnak Dominion leaned forward in his command chair, his reptilian eyes narrowing with amused disdain. Before him, the hollow screen projected the image of Earth, slowly rotating in the cold darkness of space. Thin ribbons of cloud drifted across its surface, casting ephemeral shadows over continents and oceans. The planet shimmered faintly, a fragile jewel cradled in the blackness, a world so vulnerable it seemed almost pitiful. There were no fleets patrolling its orbit. No fortified stations bristling with cannons. No warning signals, no defensive satellites standing vigil. Just an open sky, vast and empty. An easy conquest. A prize waiting to be claimed. The bridge of Corrinsville was silent, the officers at their stations casually monitoring the readouts. Some whispered in low voices, exchanging jokes about the foolishness of a race that had dared to dream among the stars but had never managed to leave their own cradle. Their claws tapped idly on control panels. Their armored tails flicked lazily in the air, a show of utter confidence. But beneath Sarn's polished calm, a faint unease began to stir. Because what they saw as weakness was only the silence of a world that had learned to wait. Through the thick reinforced windows of the command deck, Earth gleamed against the endless black. Its oceans were pools of deep cobalt, its continents dark green and brown, veiled beneath thin veils of mist. Auroras flickered at the poles, mysterious curtains of light that danced soundlessly in the upper atmosphere, like ghostly sentinels performing rituals older than memory. It was too quiet. The scanners reported no anomalous activity, no weaponized frequencies, no gravitational anomalies. Yet the readings felt wrong, somehow incomplete, as if the very fabric of the space around Earth was distorted by something unseen, something sleeping beneath the surface. Sarn's hands tightened imperceptibly on the arms of his chair. He knew silence. True silence was not the absence of noise. It was a pressure, an invisible hand pressing against the mind, warning that unseen eyes were watching. It was the breathless stillness before a predator strikes. The Dominion had crushed dozens of worlds. Some had screamed and fought, others had begged and bargained. None had waited in silence. None had hidden their fear so completely. Sarn's gaze lingered on the swirling clouds that twisted across Earth's equator. There was a strange beauty in their slow, spiraling dance, a sense of purpose, as if the planet itself was breathing in slow, patient rhythm, counting down to something inevitable. And far below those clouds, under the restless waves of the oceans, something ancient stirred. Not with anger. Not with fear. But with cold calculation. The Dominion's intelligence reports had spoken of Earth in dismissive terms. Their cities gleamed, but they were fragile, full of noise and chaos. Their armies were fierce, but trapped on the ground. Their technology was clever but crude, built for survival, not conquest. Yet none of the reports explained the feeling that now seeped into the bridge, as thick and oppressive as the vacuum beyond the walls. A feeling that Earth was not simply waiting to be conquered, but choosing its moment to reveal its true face. Somewhere deep within the ship's data archives, ancient myths spoke of species that hid their strength, that wrapped themselves in helplessness as a weapon. Creatures that feigned weakness to lure their enemies close enough to strike with devastating force. Sarn had dismissed such stories as fables. Until now. He stared harder at the planet, at the shimmering layers of atmosphere, at the endless seas that hid half the world from view. He imagined vast caverns beneath the waves, cloaked in darkness, holding secrets older than any Dominion victory. He imagined silent sentinels slumbering in the abyss, waiting for the stars to align, for the call to awaken. A cold shiver slid down his spine. On the surface, Earth was calm, unarmed, defenseless. But in its silence, there was a gravity that tugged at something primal inside him, a whisper that said, "This world has not forgotten. This world has not surrendered." It was waiting. And whatever it was waiting for was already beginning to stir. Deep beneath Earth's oceans, beyond the reach of light, ancient constructs began to stir. At first, the movements were subtle, barely a tremor against the crushing pressure of the abyss. The silt covering the seabed shivered as unseen mechanisms shuddered back to life. A slow, rhythmic vibration pulsed through the black waters, so low that even the most sensitive instruments aboard Corins will fail to detect it. Commander Sarn sent his scouts into low orbit, ordering them to scan the oceans with penetrating sweeps of radar and sonar. Small, sleek reconnaissance crafts darted towards the dark planet below, their hulls gliding silently through the thin upper atmosphere before descending into the murky shadows where no sunlight reached. And then, one by one, they vanished. No cries for help. No signs of explosion or battle. Only silence. Their signals, once steady and strong, were snuffed out like candles in a vast and endless night. Telemetry froze mid-transmission, readings collapsed into static, and even the emergency distress protocols remained silent. It was as if the scouts had been erased, wiped clean from existence without a trace. The command deck grew cold as reports came back empty. Officers whispered to each other in harsh, clipped tones. Fear, that old and unwelcome companion, crept like mist into the hearts of even the most hardened warriors. Sarn leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the swirling data streams. He felt it too. Something was watching them. Not with eyes of flesh, but with a presence that pressed against the edges of consciousness, ancient, patient, and heavy with intent. The oceans boiled. Not with violence, but with purpose. Massive plumes of vapor erupted from the sea's surface, spiraling upward into the night sky like ghostly towers. Storm clouds gathered where moments before there had been clear air, crackling faintly with silent flashes of blue and violet light. The sea itself seemed to breathe, pulling back as if inhaling before a great awakening. From the abyssal trenches, from the canyons carved by time and tectonic fury, they rose. The dreadnoughts. Titans clad in blackened armor, scarred by wars so ancient their histories had been forgotten by all but the earth itself. The first emerged slowly, its vast form breaking the surface with an eerie grace. Water cascaded down its obsidian hull in great sheets, reflecting the pale moonlight in flashes that looked almost like silent weeping. The armor bore deep gashes and burn marks, wounds from battles fought against enemies whose names had been erased by time. It hovered just above the surface, impossibly massive, casting a shadow over the ocean that stretched for miles. A second followed, slightly smaller but no less terrifying. Its hull was adorned with intricate markings, symbols worn by centuries of salt and pressure, speaking a language lost to history. Its engines emitted no flame, no roar, only a low, thrumming hum that seemed to resonate within the bones of every living creature nearby. And then came the third. A jagged colossus, its form less refined, more brutal, as if it had been reforged again and again in desperate moments of war. Its edges were uneven, its plating stitched together with layers of old metal and unknown materials, yet it carried itself with an undeniable sense of purpose. The dreadnoughts did not attack. They did not broadcast challenges or warnings. They simply hovered in silence, their dark forms blotting out the stars, their outlines barely visible through the rolling banks of mist that now coiled above the oceans. Watching. Waiting. Silent sentinels risen from the abyss, answering a call that no one had dared to make. From the bridge of Corrin's will, Sarn and his officers stared in mute horror. Their sensors, designed to detect the faintest signature of enemy movement, returned nothing but static and empty readings. The dreadnoughts did not broadcast energy signatures as living machines should. They were dark, cold, as if part of the ocean itself had taken form to stand against the invaders. Commander Sarn felt the weight of their presence like a hand pressing against his chest. These were not ships meant to fight other fleets. These were warnings. Warnings to the stars. Warnings to those who believed Earth was weak. Warnings to those who had forgotten that even the smallest world can birth forces greater than fear itself. The clouds thickened above the dreadnoughts, forming spirals that spun slowly, hypnotically, reflecting the faint shimmer of hidden lights pulsing deep within the ship's frames. Thunder rumbled across the ocean in low, drawn-out growls, as if the planet itself had found its voice again after centuries of silence. The dreadnoughts did not advance. They did not challenge the Varnak fleet. They simply existed, their presence alone louder than any battle cry, stronger than any wall of steel or shield of plasma. They had risen not to conquer. They had risen to remember. To remind the galaxy that Earth was never truly broken. Only waiting. Waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, in the cold emptiness between stars, their moment had come. In the labyrinthine depths of Earth's crust, where walls of iron and stone muffled the trembling of a wounded world, humanity waited. The command bunkers were ancient and vast, built in forgotten eras when the first whispers of galactic threats had reached human ears. Now, silent hallways stretched out like arteries beneath mountains and oceans, pulsing with the faint glow of emergency lights. Cool, recycled air hummed through narrow vents, stirring only the barest hint of movement against the cold steel floors. Within the heart of this hidden fortress stood Commander Elara Voss. Once, she had been a girl who gazed up at the stars through cracked city windows, dreaming of what might lie beyond the pale blue sky. Now, those same stars watched her from above, distant and cold. The dreams of wonder had been burned away, replaced by a hard resolve forged from years of fear and fragile hope. Elara's uniform was simple, dark gray, the fabric worn thin at the seams. Her boots were scuffed from endless patrols through dim corridors. Her face bore the faint lines of sleepless nights and hard choices, yet her green eyes still burned, fierce and unyielding. She stood before her team, a small group, faces illuminated by the flickering screens that mapped Earth's last desperate defenses. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, no longer separate by rank or purpose, but bound together by necessity. Elara remembered the old teachings, spoken in the early days when Earth had first realized it was not alone. We are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. But we are the most stubborn. The room around her buzzed faintly as hidden systems powered up, ancient systems built not for glory, but for survival. Doors long sealed with forgotten codes hissed open as buried missile silos, orbital defense nets, and cloaked countermeasures stirred from centuries of slumber. When the dark enemy arrived, a presence that bent space itself, a force older than memory, Earth did not answer with grand armadas or brilliant superweapons. It answered with quiet determination. It answered with trust. It answered with sacrifice. Above them, in the black sky stretching beyond the clouds, dreadnoughts moved into formation. But on the ground, humanity's hidden flame flickered to life in 1,000 small ways. Civilian satellites, seemingly dead for decades, reactivated with secret codes, transmitting encrypted signals across shadow networks. Forgotten factories hidden in mountain valleys roared back to life, forging parts for weapons too dangerous to have ever been built in peacetime. Cities dimmed their lights in unspoken agreement, cloaking their existence under veils of darkness. Everywhere, silent armies of volunteers worked by hand, fixing old tech, wiring new traps, designing last-minute miracles with scraps and willpower. These defenses would not stop the coming storm. They were never meant to. They existed for one purpose: to buy time. Time for the dreadnoughts to awaken fully. Time for the ancient chains to tighten around the invader. Time for humanity's true strength, its spirit, to blaze against the abyss. Elara turned slowly, her boots echoing softly in the cavernous room. She approached the central console, a relic from the first wars against the unknown, and rested her palm against the scanner. The machine shuddered, its systems groaning awake like a creature from a long, restless sleep. A ripple of anticipation moved through the team. Some clenched their fists. Others closed their eyes in silent prayer. Elara's voice, low but steady, broke the heavy silence. We fight not to conquer, but to survive. To protect what we love. Her words fell into the still air like stones dropped into deep water, sinking into the hearts of everyone present. Above ground, the black clouds churned faster. Lightning split the sky in violent flashes, casting the oceans into chaotic, momentary illumination. The dreadnoughts, silhouetted against the storm, pulsed with slow, deliberate light, an ancient heartbeat in rhythm with the planet itself. Sensors beeped weakly as the enemy's pressure increased, bending the magnetosphere, twisting the upper atmosphere into spiraling patterns that no meteorologist could explain. Radio signals fractured into gibberish. Satellites fell silent one by one. It was beginning. Elara's hand tightened into a fist. She felt the weight of all who had come before, the nameless scientists who had hidden their dreams beneath layers of secrecy, the engineers who had built wonders they would never see used, the soldiers who had prepared for wars that had yet to be fought. They had all trusted that, when the time came, humanity would not falter. And now, that time had come. In the dim bunker light, Commander Elara Voss lifted her head, her voice a whisper carried only by the unseen currents of history. Light the fires. Around her, hidden command nodes across the planet answered, not with speeches or shouts, but with silent acts of defiance, shields rising from the oceans, stealth platforms emerging from the ice, the last reserves of Earth's courage unleashed into the night. Because humanity's hidden flame had never gone out. It had waited, unseen, for this moment. When the stars forgot, but Earth remembered. And now, the fire would burn brighter than ever before. Out in the endless, breathless void, something stirred. It was no fleet, no armada of ships flashing with energy weapons or bristling with guns. It was a plague, a shapeless hunger that pulsed like a malignant star, bending space around it with each slow, poisonous beat. The ancient enemy had no form that eyes could truly follow. It was a smear across the fabric of reality, a shadow bleeding into dimensions not meant for mortal sight. Where it passed, the stars dimmed, where it lingered, matter itself seemed to tremble in silent horror. The dreadnoughts moved first. Great, black leviathans that had once slept in the deepest tombs of the Earth's oceans now rose silently against the night sky, engines thrumming with vibrations too deep for ordinary ears. Their forms, sharp and jagged like forgotten mountains, cut against the stars, moving not with the clumsy violence of warships but with the slow, inevitable certainty of celestial bodies shifting in their ancient orbits. They did not open fire. They did not issue demands. They sealed. Long-forgotten systems, embedded within their armored bones, activated one after another. Conduits of light, cold, blue, and searing in its purity, traced ancient sigils across their hulls. Shields woven not of simple energy, but of encoded memory and unbreakable will, spread outward in overlapping fields. The dreadnoughts formed a living prison around the plague. Above, in the void, the ancient enemy pushed back. Tendrils of invisible pressure rippled outward, lashing against the dreadnought's barriers with a soundless fury. Space shivered as if reality itself resisted the abomination's existence, and through it all, the dreadnoughts held firm, their silence deeper and more terrible than any battle cry. But sealing the ancient hunger was not a battle that the great ships could fight alone. On the fractured Earth below, humanity moved with desperate brilliance. In forgotten bunkers and shattered cities, teams of engineers and soldiers worked feverishly, coaxing ancient technology back to life with bare hands and bleeding fingers. Sparks showered from broken consoles. Cold sweat slicked every brow. Above them, the skies fractured under the enemy's unseen weight. Signals crackled into chaos, communications collapsed into a soup of garbled noise. Yet somehow, humanity found a way. They hijacked enemy sensor arrays, flooding the ancient hunger's senses with illusions crafted from hacked quantum signals, a symphony of lies designed to disorient and confuse. They reprogrammed derelict satellites, hollow relics of forgotten ages, transforming them into kinetic missiles. Spinning hunks of dead metal were hurled across the void with brutal precision, slamming into the enemy's thrashing limbs with the force of ancient gods throwing stones. And most terribly of all, they sent their pilots, the best and brightest, on suicide missions. Old fighters, stitched together from scrap and hope, screamed skyward through broken atmospheres. Cockpits rattled. Hulls groaned. Each pilot carried within them a final payload, not explosives, but disruption devices, broadcasting signals designed to tear holes in the plague's field of perception. Each knew they would not return. Each went anyway. Because giving up was never an option. Because surrender was not a word written in humanity's oldest songs. In the cold silence between stars, tiny streaks of light, each a fragile human vessel, stabbed at the monstrous shadow. Some vanished instantly, swallowed without a trace. Others burned across the void, carving paths of fire through the darkness. And through their sacrifice, openings appeared, tiny cracks in the ancient enemy's influence, moments where the dreadnoughts could push forward, where the seals could tighten. From the surface, civilians watched with breath held and prayers whispered. They stood atop battered rooftops and crumbled fields, heads tilted back to the heavens. They saw the brief trails of dying ships, the flashes of light where kinetic satellites struck, the strange, beautiful patterns drawn across the night by humanity's last stand. Every explosion, every falling star, every burst of static in the radio waves was a hymn sung in defiance. Not with power. Not with dominance. But with unbreakable spirit. The enemy shifted, recoiling from the unity it could not devour. It was a force of consumption, a hunger born to tear apart the weak and the divided. But Earth had become something else, a crucible where fear became resolve, where despair became fire. And in that fire, humanity had found its true weapon. The dreadnoughts glowed brighter now, not from weapons charging, but from the combined will of a species refusing to kneel. Above them, the void screamed in silence. Below, Earth answered, not with a roar of armies, not with fleets of shining ships, but with the stubborn, relentless fire of beings who knew the true shape of survival. They fought with broken tools. They fought with empty hands. They fought because the fire inside them burned hotter than any darkness ever could. And that fire was spreading. High above Earth, wrapped in the cold emptiness of orbit, the ancient dreadnoughts stirred in silence. Their blackened hulls, etched with scars of forgotten wars, pulsed with a slow, rhythmic hum, like the heartbeat of something vast and unknowable. Invisible threads of data, tighter than any spoken command, wove between the ships, linking them to a single point deep within the armored core of the largest vessel, Solstice 1. Inside that iron behemoth, Commander Elara Voss stood alone at the bridge's central platform. The room around her was cavernous and dim, lit only by the ghostly blue of half-sleeping machines. Displays hovered in the air like shards of frozen light, each showing distorted images of the enemy, a mass that defied shape, that writhed through space like a wound bleeding into reality itself. Elara was outgunned. Outnumbered. Facing a force no cannon or bomb could destroy. The air in the chamber felt heavier with every passing second, vibrating faintly with the pressure of the dark presence looming just beyond the planet's thin protective veil. Even the dreadnought's reinforced shielding creaked softly, as if groaning beneath the invisible weight. For a heartbeat, a terrible silence filled her. A silence of doubt. Of fear. But then, she remembered. The echoes of her ancestors spoke from the deepest parts of her soul, the first humans who had faced an uncaring universe with nothing but sharpened sticks and the flicker of stolen fire. Who had stared into the darkness and, trembling, had taken one step forward. Then another. And another. Fear is the oldest enemy, she whispered to herself, her breath a mist in the cold recycled air. Hope is the oldest weapon. Her hand, though trembling, found the final key embedded in the ancient command console before her. It was a relic of a time when humanity had prepared for the day no weapon could save them, when survival would depend on something greater, something invisible but indestructible. Project Phoenix. Not a missile. Not a shield. Not a gun. But a story. A memory encoded into waves of energy, wrapped in signals deeper than language, carrying not orders or threats, but truth. With a soft hiss of hydraulics and a rising thrum beneath her feet, Elara activated the final protocol. In orbit, the dreadnoughts responded. Panels along their ancient flanks slid open with the ponderous grace of tectonic plates shifting. Hidden beneath their armored hides, dormant arrays flared to life, weaving invisible filaments of signal across the battlefield, forming a net that transcended mere matter. And then they spoke. Not in words, not through sound, but in something deeper, a shockwave of memory that burst outward, silent yet deafening, sweeping across the void like a tidal wave. The story of humanity's endless fight to survive, raw, unfiltered, burning, collided with the ancient enemy. Scenes bled into the darkness. The desperate birth of fire in an endless winter. The first cities rising from rivers choked with mud and blood. The first screams of battle beneath alien skies. The endless cycle of loss and rebuilding, of war and peace, of death and birth. The story struck with a force no weapon could replicate, not with heat or pressure, but with meaning, the cumulative defiance of a species that had refused extinction at every turn. The ancient enemy recoiled. For the first time since it had slithered back into existence, it hesitated. It had consumed civilizations before, vast empires with weapons brighter and larger than Earth's might ever dream of. It had extinguished suns. It had broken planets like dry twigs. But it had never faced this. Not fire. Not steel. Not technology. It faced something far more dangerous. A stubbornness so deep it was etched into the bones of a people. It saw the memories carried in every pulse of the signal, not just victories, but losses endured. It saw children born in ruins. It saw hands rebuilding walls toppled by storms and war. It saw the tears, the songs, the stubborn refusal to die quietly. And in that reflection, for one terrible, miraculous moment, the enemy understood. This was not a world that fought because it was strong. It was a world that fought because it refused to be erased. The dreadnoughts glowed like ancient stars, their engines humming in sympathy with the signal. The space around Earth rippled as the enemy tried to retreat, folding itself into unnatural dimensions, seeking escape, but the memory followed, clinging like fire to dry wood. Inside Solstice 1, Elara stood still, eyes closed, feeling the tremor pass through the fabric of space itself. She was no longer afraid. Because she knew. Strength was never about power. Strength was the will to endure, to rise again after every fall. The story burned across the heavens, and the ancient enemy, older than the oldest dust between the stars, found itself face to face with something it could not consume. Hope. And for the first time in all its long, dark existence, it fled. Victory came not with cheers, but with silence. Across the bruised body of the earth, silence settled like mist, heavy and slow, seeping into the cracks of shattered cities and bleeding forests. The skies, once alive with fire and fury, now hung heavy and dark, veiled by clouds that glowed faintly from the aftershocks of battle. Here and there, broken satellites burned in long, falling arcs, their final descent painting streaks of pale flame across the wounded heavens. The oceans were not still. They churned with a strange unease, great whirlpools of shattered wreckage spinning where mighty dreadnoughts had once slumbered beneath the waves. Here, the water frothed with the debris of lost machines. There, it shimmered with unnatural colors, scars left by the energies unleashed during Earth's final stand. On the continents, cities lay wounded, some entire skylines bent and broken, skeletal towers rising from fields of rubble. The neon glow of once bustling streets now flickered weakly among the ruins, swallowed by the rising dust that clung to the air like ash. Highways lay split open like cracked bones. Monuments of human achievement, painstakingly built over centuries, now stood crooked, torn, and defiant against the dying light. Yet, amid this devastation, there was no sound of despair. No weeping. No cries for revenge. Only the breathless, sacred quiet of survivors who understood the magnitude of what had been endured. In the heart of what remained of the primary command center, deep beneath the scorched earth, Commander Elara stood among the ruins. The great hall that had once hummed with tactical updates and urgent voices now resembled the hollowed ribcage of some ancient, fallen beast. Steel beams jetted from collapsed ceilings. Broken screens hung from twisted mounts. Cables dangled like vines, their severed ends sparking fitfully in the darkness. Elara's uniform was torn, the insignia at her shoulders scorched beyond recognition. Dust clung to her skin. Blood, both her own and others, had dried in dark streaks down her arms. Yet she stood tall, unbowed, her eyes alight, not with grief, but with a fierce, enduring pride. Her fingers brushed the remnants of the central command console, its surface shattered into 1,000 gleaming fragments. In the broken reflections, she saw not failure, but memory, echoes of every soul who had fought, every life that had been gambled, every sacrifice made not in desperation, but in defiance. They had survived. Not because they possessed greater weapons. Not because they had crafted more terrible engines of war. They had survived because they possessed greater hearts. Because when the void had howled, they had answered not with surrender, but with unyielding fire. Above, hidden behind veils of dust and broken satellites, the dreadnoughts still lingered, vast shadows against the wounded sky, their hulls blackened but unbroken. They drifted now not as weapons of destruction, but as silent witnesses to what humanity had become, not conquerors, not victims, but something far rarer. Endurers. Across the galaxy, far beyond the reach of Earth's wounded light, civilizations watched in awe and quiet horror. The beings who had once laughed at Earth's insignificance now fell silent, their pride turned to dust in their mouths. For they had seen something that could not be erased by armies or rewritten by the passing of time. A truth as old as the first heartbeat. Strength was not dominance. Strength was not terror. Strength was endurance. It was the stubborn, ferocious will to rise again, bloodied but unbeaten, beneath skies darkened by the smoke of failure. It was the courage to stand barefoot on poisoned soil and dare the universe to try again. It was the quiet promise made from parent to child, from generation to generation, that no matter what storms came, humanity would endure. Elara lifted her gaze to the shattered roof above, through which the gray sky wept slow, bitter rain onto the ruins. She felt it soak through her torn sleeves, cold against her bruised skin. She welcomed it. Because the rain meant life still moved. The world still turned. The fire had not been extinguished. Behind her, scattered survivors began to emerge from the wreckage, engineers with soot-streaked faces, soldiers supporting each other with broken limbs, civilians clutching tattered relics of a life that now belonged to another age. No orders were given. None were needed. They began rebuilding with their hands, their voices, their hope. Brick by brick. Word by word. Breath by breath. And above them all, among the crumbling towers and drowning ruins, Earth's dreadnoughts kept silent vigil, no longer guardians against an external threat, but monuments to the resilience that had saved a world. In the end, the void had come for them. And it had failed. Because strength, true strength, was not the power to destroy. It was the power to endure the storm. To bend but not break. To bleed but not surrender. To remember what it meant to be human, and to stand tall even in the ruins. And now, Earth remembered. And Earth endured. Above the bruised, battered Earth, the dreadnoughts returned to their silent orbit. They drifted through the blackness like ancient monuments, dark, scarred silhouettes against the cold gleam of distant stars. Their massive hulls bore the evidence of battle, fractures in their armor, blackened scorch marks along their edges, long scars where alien forces had clawed at their defenses. Yet still they floated, unbroken, like silent sentinels guarding a world that had proven itself beyond doubt. Their mission was complete. The ancient enemy had been sealed. The threat had been beaten back into the forgotten corners of the void. But below them, on the wounded surface of the planet they had risen to protect, humanity's truest battle was just beginning. The battle to rebuild. Smoke still curled in thin tendrils from the skeletons of ruined cities, rising into the gray skies like prayers offered to indifferent heavens. Roads lay shattered, splintered into jagged scars across once fertile lands. Rivers ran dark with the remnants of battle, their banks lined with the debris of dreams turned to ash. Yet within the ruins, life stirred. Children emerged from the rubble, eyes wide with wonder, clutching relics of a world they would never fully remember. Old men and women, their faces weathered like ancient stone, set to work clearing the shattered streets with bare, calloused hands. Soldiers, too exhausted to lift their weapons again, instead lifted the fallen beams of collapsed shelters, rebuilding without waiting for orders. Everywhere, against the bleakness, hope took root like stubborn weeds growing through cracked concrete. The battle to forgive was harder. Graves were dug into the broken earth, lines of simple stones bearing the names of the lost, and there were many names. Too many. Rows of markers stretched across fields where flowers once bloomed, now a sea of silent memory. Forgiveness, for some, meant forgiving the sky for its betrayal, the stars for their cold indifference. For others, it meant forgiving themselves, for surviving when so many had not. There were no great ceremonies, no speeches shouted to the heavens. Only quiet moments, where heads bowed and hands trembled, and tears fell without shame onto hallowed ground. And still, humanity pressed onward. Because the greatest battle of all was the battle to dream again. In the shattered courtyards of ruined schools, teachers gathered the children and began again, scratching lessons into the dust with broken sticks. In abandoned libraries, the young wandered through fallen shelves, collecting what books had survived, cradling them like treasures. Artists, their studios reduced to rubble, painted on the remains of walls, filling the gray with bursts of defiant color, flames of orange, rivers of blue, blossoms of crimson and gold. They dreamed not because the world had made it easy, but because dreaming was the one act no power in the galaxy could strip from them. Commander Elara stood atop the crumbling remains of the old command bunker, the wind tugging at her torn coat, the rain washing away the blood and ash that clung stubbornly to her boots. She lifted her gaze to the stars, their light pale and sharp against the endless black. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly across the broken stones. We were forgotten once. Never again. We choose our future. And we choose hope. Around her, survivors paused. They looked up, their faces lined with exhaustion but lit by something stronger than strength, something brighter than fire. Belief. In the far reaches of the galaxy, in halls of ancient empires and great dominions, whispers spread like wildfire. Earth. The name spoken not with derision, but with awe. With fear. With wonder. Civilizations that had once laughed at humanity's insignificance now studied their own weaknesses in uneasy silence. For they had seen something they had forgotten, that the will to survive, the stubborn flame of hope, was stronger than the sharpest blade, more enduring than the most unbreakable fortress. One truth had become clear, undeniable, carved into the fabric of the universe itself. Humanity had not survived because it was lucky. It had survived because it refused to surrender. It had bled and broken and burned. But it had endured. It had dreamed in darkness. It had rebuilt from ashes. It had whispered to the void, "We are still here." And the void, for all its vastness and hunger, had no answer. As the ruins cooled and the first new seeds were planted into the wounded soil, humanity looked outward once more, not with fear, but with the fierce, endless curiosity that had carried them from the caves to the stars. They knew now what they were. They knew what they had always been. Not conquerors. Not victims. But something far greater. The future's stubborn architects. And in the deep silence after the storm, Earth began to sing again. And so, as the dreadnoughts returned to silent orbit, and the ashes of battle cooled beneath bruised skies, one truth burned brighter than ever. Humanity did not survive because it was lucky. Humanity survived because it refused to surrender. If this story stirred something inside you, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story. Because more secrets, more battles, and more legends are waiting just beyond the stars. Now tell me, if you were called to defend Earth's last hope, would you rise or remain hidden? Comment below, and don't forget your secret code #SilentFire. So I know you're one of the watchers, the dreamers, the defenders.